You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast.
Hi, you're listening to a Veterinary Innovation Podcast for the first time broadcasted from another country. We're in Ukraine with my co-host, Sean Wilkie. So, Sean, why don't you introduce our guest today?
Yeah, really excited to have Brendan join us today. Brendan Lynch from VCA Animal Hospitals. Currently, he's the VP of Digital Strategy and Client Experience. Prior to this, Brendan helped launch multiple businesses inside Procter & Gamble. And before that, he created several action sports companies. So Brendan and me kind of have met several times throughout the last couple of years. And I always thought of you, Brendan, as a very innovative guy. So we're happy to have you as one of the first guests on our podcast. So welcome to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast.
Thanks, guys. I'd like to say the same with both of you guys in the innovation realm. So really excited to be part of it and looking forward to having an engaging conversation.
Yeah, it's really cool. We tried to do this a week ago, and I believe you were surfing and we were traveling, so it didn't work out, but pretty interesting. We've got quite the span of time zones tonight. I think it's 9 p.m. here in Ukraine, and what time is it in California?
California is just about 11 o'clock.
A.M.
A.M., yes, not p.m.
Very strange world, these time zones. So I guess to get started, how the hell did you transition from action sports to veterinary medicine?
Yeah, it's actually a little more organic than you might think, but if I kind of go back in time, I had sold an action sports distribution company back in 2004. And at that time, I decided I wanted to go back to business school. And while I was in business school, I ended up working with an incubator that worked with P&G, which was launching new digital businesses. One of the businesses that we launched was Petside.com. That was launched in 2007 in partnership with NBC Universal and P&G. And at the time, P&G owned Iams and Eukanuba, which coincidentally is now owned by Mars, as is VCA Animal Hospitals. And Iams and Eukanuba were kind of the charter sponsors of the site. And Petside was a comprehensive source of information and services that help pets and their owners get the most out of life. But one of the things that we had added as part of the core offerings was what we called Pet Vet at the time. And this allowed pet owners to enter their pet symptoms and get useful advice and possible diagnosis. And at the time, it was actually the first digital triage service in the pet space. And we had partnered with AHA to help bring this thing to life. So that kind of got me a little bit into the pet space, or actually more than a little bit, but pretty deep in there. But after we successfully launched Petside, I got this pet care bug. I'd always been a pet lover and pet parent myself. And I realized that, I could marry my love for pets and business. I took my pet to a VCA for years at that point, so I was already a client. And I would drive by the VCA corporate office, which we call the support office. I think I drove by it hundreds of times because I would literally be almost dead into it, make a left turn, and head on my way into my office at the time. So after 3 years of doing this and launching Petside, a light bulb went off, and I went, gosh, could I do something similar like this for VCA? Because at the time, they really weren't doing anything that was even comparable to what we had done with Petside. So I was brainstorming, who do I know at VCA? Turns out that my dad actually knew Bob Anton, who was the CEO and founder of VCA from 30 years ago. They had crossed paths in the human healthcare side before he had started VCA. He put in a call. They never actually connected. I pestered his assistant for what seemed like forever, but it was probably just a month or so. Ended up getting a meeting with Bob. He heard my pitch, obviously liked it enough. He had sent me over to Doug Drew, who's currently the president of VCA Animal Hospitals. But at the time, he was running a company called Think Pets, which was a leading veterinary marketing analytics company, and Bob Anton was one of the majority owners. So we'd hit it off, and kind of long story short, Doug hired me as the VP of Digital at Think Pets, and I got to develop some really interesting products and really get my feet wet in the veterinary space. Think Pets was later acquired by VCA, and kind of after some twists and turns, I ended up to where I am today.
It's very interesting to me because I had a recent experience with with a startup and then with a larger organization. And one of the things that always was fascinating with the work that I've seen from the outside that you do at VCA is the combination of the entrepreneurial spirit and innovation within the large organization. And as we all know, there could be a lot of red tape, and sort of, to me, sometimes felt like walking in the mud. How did you kick off the whole Alexa project and others, and how did it feel to try to innovate within the large organization? Can you share that experience?
It's an interesting one for sure. And I'd recently heard someone say that innovation is not an event. It's a process and it can take years. Well, from my experience, that is absolutely true. And the reality is that, like you'd said, is moving an organization the size of VCA is not an easy task, and it certainly doesn't happen overnight. So I kind of look at my role. There's actually a great analogy. I like to draw inspiration from a lot of different places, and oftentimes my team wonders what the heck I'm reading on a daily basis. But one of those areas was, I happen to say, I don't know if you guys saw it, Jeff Bridges, who won some type of award with the Golden Globes, and during his speech earlier this year, he goes on to tell the story, and I think it's a great analogy for my department and my role at VCA. So he goes on to tell this story about how engineers were challenged with turning these big oceanic tankers. It took a tremendous amount of energy to turn these tankers with these big rudders. So the engineers came up with this great idea. If they put a small rudder on the big rudder, and the small rudder turns the big rudder, and the big rudder turns the ship. This little rudder is called a trim tab, which I'd learned from the speech. And if you look at VCA as kind of this big oceanic tanker, I like to think of myself and my department and a lot of others in the support office is, we're really this trim tab. We're small, but we have the ability to guide and turn the ship in the direction we want to go. And our teams can help deliver and make a more delightful pet care experience. But as you know, and there's a lot of large organizations realize that the reality is 84% of companies fail to deliver meaningful business value from their digital transformation efforts. And when you say, why is this? Well, in today's age, it's not because of lack of resources or funding. Almost all companies have access to the same technology. And, healthy funding obviously helps, but it doesn't guarantee success. So it really comes down to, I think, not only at VCA, but any organization, it comes down to the company's purpose and overall culture. So we were lucky enough that senior leadership could clearly see the world was changing, and we needed to take risks and adapt to better meet the changing needs of our clients. And what one of my previous colleagues started, Aaron Frazier, and I had since took over, he went out and did extensive amount of research very early on and launched a client experience, or what others outside of our industry think of as customer experience. So we were really ahead of the curve in terms of really trying to understand what our customers wanted before it was really trendy, because it's kind of one of the big buzzwords today, and there's a reason for that, because it's really important. But we've been driven by what we call our client I wants. And our client I wants focus on what Jeff Bezos calls durable client needs. So these are client needs. They don't fundamentally change from year to year. And it's not about chasing the latest technology or trends. What we look at is, and then we've turned and looked at and said, how do we turn these client I wants into an actionable strategy, which we kind of communicate as making pet care easier, more accessible, and delightful. So if we go kind of back to Alexa, it really wasn't a hard decision for us, because it wasn't about should we develop a voice-controlled app. The question we were asking ourselves at the time, and where technology and adoption outside of our space had gone, was does Alexa, or would Alexa, make pet care easier, more accessible, and delightful for our clients? And overall, we've set out on this journey to build a client experience platform and not just a bunch of one-off apps chasing technology. But when it comes to technology, it was actually one of the easier projects we've done, and I'll go on to kind of explain that a little bit, because we didn't start by trying to create an Alexa skill. That would have been really hard, to be honest, because we wouldn't have had the plumbing, the foundation, and in many cases even kind of the culture to accept it. So we were very fortunate, even before my time at VCA, that we developed our own proprietary practice management system called Woofware. And this really set the foundation for a lot of the future innovations that my team has been able to bring to life. And when I come on board, we'd identified some real key business opportunities that required us to get real-time access to read and write data from Woofware. We wanted to send text appointment reminders, but not just send them and alert people. We wanted to actually get back the confirmations from clients and post that in Woofware in real time, so we can not only create a good experience, but we could help reduce the load of the staff. And we also wanted to bring to life, and these are things that we've since launched years ago, is the ability for clients to book appointments online based on real-time appointment availability. Not appointment requests where somebody gets back to you. You see the time, you pick the time that's most convenient for you, it's booked, away you go.
Interject for a second. That's really interesting. There's several startups, in the space right now, in the vet space, that are trying to do the same thing. And I think one of the struggles is the integration into all of the different platforms. So it's really interesting that you guys have that proprietary technology, which helps you innovate to some degree.
Yeah, so building out this service layer of APIs that allowed us to read and write data in real time, once we solved for this, and we didn't solve for every use case when we started, obviously, but it really opened the door to a ton of possibilities, which we've brought to life over time. So the reality was our Alexa skill was built off of the existing APIs that we developed for our MyVC app and our online appointment booking. So it took us only a few months from start to finish to build the Alexa skill. Obviously, that wouldn't have been possible in that timeline if we had to build it from scratch and build out everything. Really, what we learned was the hardest part in terms of working with smart speakers or voice-connected apps is really how to leverage and work with natural language processing, creating those decision trees and writing the scripts. But, kind of really to answer the question is culturally, our organization was already on board with the overall client experience strategy. So this was really an easy extension of what we were doing. It was kind of like we added a room to the house, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes tons of sense. So what's the uptake been like? What are you hearing from your clients? What's your usage like? How many unique kind of hits to the Alexa skill have you got since you launched it? Any idea?
Yeah, and to be honest, it's one of those things that we expected to start out slow. There isn't really, if you look across a lot of other skills that are out there, it's a slow uptake. Obviously, smart speakers are the fastest growing consumer technology since the smartphone. But if you look at what those use cases are, they're really around a lot of things that you may do on a day-to-day basis. Like in my house, we ask about the weather. We play music using Amazon Prime. You can do the same thing, obviously, with Google. So we've started out slow, knowing that it's going to be a journey and a learning experience and something that we can get our feet wet in, figure out where it's going, and hopefully be a little bit early and continue to iterate and do it. But, so far, it's not something that we have all of our eggs in that basket, but something that we expect to grow and evolve over time as the platform obviously increases and we learn for other opportunities to jump on board.
That makes tons of sense. Do you see any other, or have you guys iterated or thought of any other areas where smart speakers may play a role in vet medicine for VCA?
Yeah, there's some companies out there, I think it's PetVet and some others that are trying to do more voice-controlled teletriage, so to speak. And, I think there's an opportunity around there. There's companies in the human healthcare side that are doing that. We certainly have the data to do all that stuff. We just have to pick our battles wisely, so to speak, and make sure that we're putting our limited resources towards the things that we have the highest value. So in the smart speaker space, we feel like we're getting our feet wet. We're going to continue to learn and continue to evolve, but we want to be careful not to overly invest.
And with the voice recognition, this is a hot topic overall in the tech industry, and where I personally think that this is a major delay in any sort of profession, especially taking, those that require medical notes, the legal system, and there's just so much revolution, I think, to be done. Do you think, knowing our core customer veterinarian, that veterinarians would be adaptive to potentially changing the way they record their records, or some of them just switch to maybe the nurses to recording the notes? So do you think it's in the books for the vets soon to switch to dictate?
I think so. Obviously Sean knows it probably best in our space in terms of the dictation side, but I think there's a lot of opportunities. Natural language processing is getting better and better, and coupled with machine learning, we see that there's definitely a trajectory to make, on the veterinarian side and the vet tech side, to make medical record entry easier and faster. We know that if we look on the human side, which we have similar data, and I'm sure other practice management systems do, is that entering medical records is a pain point for doctors. It takes a tremendous amount of administrative work. Doctors really went to med school, as you know, to practice medicine, not to do a lot of administrative work. So I think voice interactions and machine learning absolutely has a future in our space. And I think it's something that, collectively there'll be a number of different people trying to go figure that out with different approaches. Which one will work is to be determined, but I think it's an exciting time and it's an exciting future, and hopefully it really benefits the industry overall.
Interesting, to think of, Brennan, with your role in smaller companies and startups, and then your role as kind of an innovation lead inside a large organization. What are some of the challenges that you've experienced on both sides, and what are some of the stark differences between innovation in a small organization and innovation in a large organization like VCA?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, innovation, from my perspective and my experience, it's hard. It just is. It doesn't matter if you're big or small, but there are definitely some unique advantages on either side of the coin. Ultimately, I kind of always go back that big or small, you need to have a clear purpose and a strategy. Without this, you're kind of left just drifting at sea, hoping that someone will come and rescue you. And as the saying goes, hope is not a strategy. So, if you have a clear purpose and a strategy, I honestly believe there are tremendous opportunities at large organizations to take more risks, quickly iterate, and quickly scale what's successful. So if we look at the larger organizations, they inherently have bigger client bases. This allows large organizations like VCA, or even if you look on the human side, CVS is doing some interesting stuff, to test new concepts without impacting all of your clients. Obviously, you can test in a real-world environment, hopefully refine those concepts faster, and you have a higher degree of confidence because hopefully your sample size is bigger and you're really more in the wild at that point. On the financial side, you can develop and test initiatives across a large retail organization that might cost let's just throw a number out and say a couple $100,000. And, this is a lot of money for a small startup that may have raised a few $1 million. But if you look at a large retail healthcare organization, this might translate to, about $20 per location. So it's relatively low risk in the big scope of a larger organization because it's honestly, if you're looking at $20 a month, it's probably less than their overall coffee budget for the month. And then if we look on the technology side, as you guys know firsthand, the cost to build new applications and functionality has gone down significantly. I think one of the biggest dilemmas that the large organizations face these days is whether you build or buy. With all of the SaaS models out there, and you've got companies like Twilio, you don't have to pay these large, exorbitant license fees. You pay as you go, and you pay for what you use. So it makes it more attractive in some cases to go out there and build it because it can be more cost effective and you're more agile. In some cases, it makes sense to go and license that. But on the con side, in a large organization, you have a tremendous amount of technical debt and processes that in some cases need to be unraveled. And these can quickly derail or delay large initiatives. And if we look on a smaller organization, oftentimes you can just make quicker decisions and move faster. A lot of times because you just have less embedded processes. And in most cases, there are no legacy systems to deal with. And I've been on both sides of that, and those can be real problematic when you're trying to move towards the future because you're looking at significant investments to do things that in small organizations is really simple to do. The other thing from the small side, if you're a big organization, as I mentioned before, you can make bigger bets, but in a small organization, some of these bets could make or break the organization. So I think there's a high margin for error. And overall, if you look at the innovation scale and what makes things successful, I'd watched this TED Talk that Bill Gross did, who's the CEO of Ideal Labs. It's a few years ago. I think he did in 2015, but I think it's still relevant today. And he'd gone through and figured out, looking at his portfolio of companies, because they've started hundreds of companies, some successful, some failed, and other external companies. And he really came up with, if we went with the top 5 key factors, the number 1 is timing. Number 2 is the team execution. 3 is the idea. 4 is the business model. And the last one is funding. So as we know, that team and execution are absolutely critical. I love the saying that Mike Tyson says that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Well, when it comes to innovation, you get punched in the face a lot. So you need a team that can really roll with the punches and come out the other side. But I think overall, I believe innovation can be successful both big and small organizations. But the ability to be successful and to innovate, I think, is driven primarily by the market timing and the team's ability to execute on the idea.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said. And I've seen that TED Talk. It's totally awesome. It was really neat, Brennan. When I was in California to visit you, I guess it was probably 8-10 months ago now, or maybe even a year. We went out to lunch. That'll be in California. It's one of my favorite places. I actually met my wife very close to your office, which is kind of interesting. But when we went out for lunch, you had introduced me to Bob Anton. It was a great pleasure to have met him. And it must be very interesting to work with, one of the juggernauts of the vet space. And what have you learned from him, and what's that experience been like working with him so closely?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Bob's a great guy, great visionary, and he's obviously been able to do a tremendous amount of good for the industry, for VCA, and we have 25,000 employees. So he's been able to really positively impact so many people's lives, and obviously the lives of millions of pet parents and their pets. Anyone who's ever met with Bob, he said it's quite an out-of-body experience. He's a really interesting character. He tends to really push you, but the greatest part I think that Bob brings as a mentor and a CEO and a leader in our company in the space is he's always been very entrepreneurial and willing to take calculated risks if they make sense. In our business, there isn't, although kind of going back to Ivan's question, large organizations, you get a lot of bureaucracy, but we're lucky enough within our organization, and there is some that are necessary when you get to a large enough size just to make sure that the machine continues to move forward. But Bob has been always really great at being able to help identify and support entrepreneurial initiatives or kind of intrapreneurship in the company and get behind it and support it. And one of the things, and I think one of the reasons we've been so successful, is both Bob and Doug have been really big advocates of what we're doing, which helped create a groundswell for us and help drive the whole organization from a culture to where client experience and innovation has really become more of a part of our cultural DNA.
Brendan, this has been super awesome. It's been interesting to get a little bit of a snapshot to what it's like to work in the largest company in the vet space. It's been really neat. I've really enjoyed it, and we're almost at time. So is there anything else that you wanted to share with us before we wrap up for tonight, this morning, I guess, depending on what part of the world you're in?
I think if there was anything I'd close in something that I've talked to various startups about is there are different models in our industry. Obviously, I'm looking at it from the lens of a large organization, but as these startups figure out their business models and how they're going to work with companies, I think some are looking at it more from a productized base of how do I create an end product that I can sell to independent practices that comes, as a fully equipped product suite that you can kind of plug and play. But with the larger organizations, and you look at the VCA and the Banfield, and there's more corporate groups forming with more private equity and VC money behind it, I think some of these startups need to also look at how do they create more of a service side business, which isn't necessarily an end product that you're delivering, because if you look at organizations like VCA, we have a client experience that we're looking to deliver, and we're looking to integrate things into that. We don't have to build everything, and everything doesn't have to originate inside the company, but we have to make sure that it integrates seamlessly with the company. So, I'd always encourage entrepreneurs to think about, one, what business model and what market do they want to approach, and what's the right market product fit for it, but how might they create services that could be integrated into these different models, and how might they price that in a way that's attractive so it's not just a multi-million-dollar price tag. Let's tag the big whale, so to speak, probably the worst analogy in the pet space, but get the big one there, and instead figure out how can you kind of go in on a low impact, low friction, and help grow your business with the other business by adding value within their ecosystem.
Thanks so much for listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. We're pretty social people, so you'll find us on every social media channel. Also, you can check out our website at theveterinaryiinnovationpodcast.com. Thanks so much for listening.